my name is Hristina Crenn, a webinar intern at onehealthlessons.com. Today, I have the absolute privilege to talk with Dr. Tracey McNamara, who is actually a professor of pathology at the Western University of Health Sciences, more precisely at the College of Veterinary Medicine. Hello, Dr. McNamara. How are you doing today?
Hello, good to talk to you.
Excellent. Could you please tell us more about yourself, your academic background, and basically why did you decide to become a professor of pathology?
Well, I actually decided to be a veterinarian when I was living in Kenya and working with the game department, and that was it. Once I worked with wildlife, I was hooked. And so I went to vet school, and then after that, I pursued a residency training program in comparative pathology because at that time, very little was known about the diseases of captive and free-ranging wildlife. And I did my residency program. Most of it was spent at the Bronx Zoo in New York City, now known as the Wildlife Conservation Society. And I spent 18 years working on diagnosing disease in both captive and free-ranging wildlife.
Excellent. And Western University of Health Sciences, in which state is located?
Now I'm in California.
California.
Yeah, the vet school's in Pomona, California. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing this information with me. I would like to know, for instance, why it is important to monitor animal health. Is this process related to human health as well? And if yes, how?
Well, all you have to do is look at what's going on right now. COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is believed to have originated as a bat virus, and it has spilled over into people. And as such, that's what we call a zoonotic disease, from animals to people, but it can go the reverse way too. It can go from people to animals, as just happened in the mink in Denmark. Yes, animal health, human health, and the environment are all interrelated, and that's why we have the One Health movement. It's recognizing that you can't separate those three and treat them as distinct, separate entities, especially today, because we've had so many emerging infectious diseases in the past 20 years, like the avian influenza, H1N1, that everyone was terrified about, spread by migratory birds, SARS virus, Middle Eastern respiratory virus, Nipah, Hendra. These are all animal-related viruses, and the frequency with which we are being challenged by these zoonotic threats is becoming, we're seeing it more and more and more. So yes, One Health is a necessity to maintain, to protecting human health. Animal health and human health are definitely related, as is the environment with climate change. So One Health is taking a holistic approach to diseases that can jump species.
Indeed, you're absolutely right. As far as I know, the Western Nile virus, or more precisely, the West Nile virus, was discovered in 1999. And actually, you were basically the one who detected the West Nile virus in the States. And you have mentioned in your TEDx talk that it was a virus that basically never before was seen in the Western Hemisphere. How do we know that? How do we discover that it was never before?
Well, and actually it was discovered in 1999 in the United States. The virus itself was discovered in the 1930s in Uganda, in Africa.
Okay, yes.
But it had never before been found in the United States. And that's because certain viruses are found in certain parts of the world, like Ebola is in Africa, and yellow fever, well, we see a lot of that in South America. But we can't go by those old rules anymore, because so many things that affect whether we have a viral outbreak or not are related to climate and vectors, mosquitoes and ticks, and now air travel. And so those old rules sort of go out of the book. They go out the window. The problem is, until recently, we really have not been looking for new viruses. And an example is monkeypox in the United States. When it popped up, it was because someone had imported some giant Gambian rats from West Africa. They infected some pet prairie dogs at a pet store, but that virus was not found until it was in people in 4 states. We really only look for what we know. We're not looking for the unknown. So that's why we're continually surprised.
Indeed, and actually, Louis Pasteur, a French a famous scientist, once has mentioned that basically the fortune fosters the prepared mind. And this is also a saying or a phrase that you have mentioned during your TEDx talk. What message would you like to transmit with this by stating this saying, actually?
I think his point that he was making is that when you have an open mind, and if you aren't defined to very narrow, um, thoughts, you open yourself for discovery. And that's not the way everybody seems to think. People are not asking what if. And at the zoo, I was forced to have an open mindset, because so much of what I was looking at was being seen for the first time. So if I had only gone by what was in the textbooks, I would have misdiagnosed a lot of diseases in these valuable endangered species. So all that means is, yes, I ruled out everything that was known, but at the end of every diagnosis, I asked myself, what if? What if this is something new? And that's all it is.
Indeed, and as far as I know, also Louis Pasteur actually once mentioned that the microbes will always have the last word, and and that is very catchy as a saying, and he was definitely right in his era when he was mentioning that basically microbes are going to have the last word, because that's how a virus starts to emerge or to be transmitted from a subject to a subject. So let's mention it like this, or from an animal to human being. For instance, you have also mentioned in the TED Talk that there was some relation between the crows who are basically having an inflammation in the brain that were in the zoo, and that there was some relation with the people also that were infected in New York. How that happened? How did you, for instance, relate those two events that occurred in two different states, for instance?
Well, actually, the thing is, the crows were dying of encephalitis. They started dropping on the grounds of the Bronx Zoo, where they threatened our captive collection. Whatever they were dying of might have infected our birds. So I did an investigation. I ruled out the 3 viruses known to cause encephalitis in birds in the Western Hemisphere. And I was able to do that quickly because the pathology was different and because I had built in sentinels. As a veterinarian, I looked across species, and had it been any of the 3 viruses known to cause encephalitis in birds in the United States, the chickens in the zoo should have been dying and the emus, but they weren't. So I quickly realized I was dealing with something new to veterinary medicine, but it wasn't until the New York City Department of Health announced that people were also dying of an unusual form of encephalitis that I made the connection, because the temporal and spatial relationship between the crows and the people both dying of an unusual form of encephalitis, same time, same place, was simply too striking to ignore. And that's why I made the link between could this be something new? Just mentioned the CDC had said that people were dying of St. Louis encephalitis, which is a mosquito-borne virus. However, that virus is not known to kill birds. So it was either a new form of encephalitis, a new strain, or it wasn't St. Louis encephalitis at all. And that's what it turned out. That was the case. It wasn't St. Louis, it was a novel virus. But it took a veterinarian looking across species to arrive at that conclusion.
I understand, and it is actually a method that is called in logic, basically deductive reasoning, and I think that you have used this method basically to relate these two phenomena happening at the same time in two different places, and this perhaps will relate to my next question. In your opinion, how can we protect ourselves from newly emerging disease? Like, is it important to detect early symptoms that a human being can feel, or eventually, if the if the human being is owning a pet, is it mandatory in this case, if there are some symptoms, to bring this animal basically to the veterinarian for making further analysis? Is early detection indispensable in your opinion?
Absolutely, because with all of these emerging and viral infections, we've been way behind the curve in terms of actually detecting them. And that's because we do not do species neutral biosurveillance anywhere. All of our funding goes to finding disease in humans, but we have not funded the veterinary agencies and the wildlife agencies to be able to do real-time epidemiologic surveillance of those animal species that could provide early warning. That's a big problem. That is what needs to be addressed. But in terms of what we can do, all of us, I served as scientific advisor on the film Contagion with Matt Damon. And if everybody watches that film, you have to pay attention to the last 5 minutes of the movie. That's when you see bulldozers knocking down trees, and then you see bats flying over to a pig farm, and the bats are eating fruit from the fruit trees on the pig farm, but they're also pooping and peeing on the fruit. They're contaminating it. It drops to the ground, a pig gobbles it up, and the next thing we know, we see Gwyneth Paltrow and a chef who is chopping up pork chops, wipes his bloody hands on his apron, that's all, comes out and shakes Gwyneth Paltrow's hand, and then we have a worldwide pandemic. That's the problem. What it gets to is most of these emerging infectious diseases have been related to man-made activity. The bats only left the forest because we cut down their habitat. If we left them alone, they would not have moved to the pig farm. So that's what everyone is looking at now, is how can we somehow decrease the interaction between people and wildlife? Maybe we don't need wet markets where people are selling and eating wildlife. Maybe we need to leave the forest alone. Maybe we need buffer areas. All of those things are very, very important, and a lot of money is going to go into studying how can we decrease spillover from wildlife into humans. But on an individual basis, One Health is, that's something every one of us can do. If you have flower pots in your backyard with a little bit of water in that dish underneath that flower pot, that's a perfect mosquito breeding ground. And with climate warming, global warming, we're going to see more and more mosquito-borne diseases. So everyone has to do their bit and be responsible about decreasing the habitat for ticks, for mosquitoes. There are things every one of us can do. And so pay attention to that movie, do what you can to fight climate change, and, take personal responsibility for keeping your eyes open. If you see something, say something. And remember, with West Nile virus, it was the public that was yelling about the crows because there were big birds dropping dead on their front lawns. So the public can play a very important role in recognition of these rapidly evolving events. Not just government, the public.
Absolutely. And one of the points that you mentioned, that I think that is also relatively important, is that human beings need to be aware about the necessity to not anymore basically reduce the habitat of the animal world, or of the animals briefly, because that obviously in that case animals are going to move to other areas where they can find food for survival. In the Balkan region there was a period in the winter when people were illegally cutting trees from the mountains in order to use their to use their trees or wood basically for warming their houses. But the wolves from the mountain came into in the cities, until the cities, to search for food, because basically their habitat was to some extent reduced, because the forest territory was also diminished or reduced. Therefore, I think that this is a very important concept to mention. I'm from the social science background, and I do not really know much about veterinarian pathology. Could you please basically tell us what is behind that science, and what is the philosophy that can basically show, or let me understand, me as a student, the whole concept as a of the veterinarian pathology? Can we define that basically? I'm trying to reformulate the question in a brief way, but this is what I mean. Like, how can we define veterinarian pathology? It's just another branch of veterinary medicine.
Right, it is. And I'll admit, when I go to cocktail parties, when I was working at the zoo, I used to just say, I'm a zoo veterinarian, because when you tell people at a cocktail party, well, I cut up dead things, they don't want to shake your hand. But the bottom line is, look at everything we're learning about COVID-19 right now. Someone has to, when something dies, you have to figure out, if it's a new virus, how it kills. What tissues is it impacting? Is it the lungs? Is it the kidneys? You only understand that if you look at all the organs in the body. We call that a necropsy. In humans, it's an autopsy. Same thing, just it's on animals. Then, based on what you see, you also then look at things under the microscope and see, is there actual damage to those organs? And with COVID-19, with West Nile virus, the diagnostic tests that have been developed that information has sprung from information that came out of a pathology lab, where people said, it's hitting this tissue, it's doing this, it's doing this. It's the foundation of medicine. Pathology is understanding a disease, figuring out what it does, and helping to figure out how we can diagnose that disease. And as a veterinary pathologist, human pathologists look at one species. Veterinary pathologists look at everything across the animal
species.
And that's why we are poised to play a very important role in recognition of emerging infectious diseases that are zoonotic.
Absolutely. I have one more question regarding mutations. For instance, we know that the COVID-19 virus recently has mutated, and there are new variants that emerged. In your opinion, how rapid is a mutation? How can rapidly occur? Basically, does that mutation need a few months, or a longer period of time? Because we know that the COVID-19 is almost present for 10 months. Therefore, is it a short or a long period for a mutation?
Um, Actually, I mean, viruses, it's just the nature of being a virus. They do mutate, especially when they're in a new environment, sort of uh, figuring out where they're going to fit best in that environment. And, coronaviruses, we know they mutate all the time. That's just part of being a coronavirus. Um, and there will be more mutations. You have to expect that. The good news is with the new vaccine technology, the platforms that they're using, um, they'll be able to pivot. And if the vaccines no longer are effective against new mutant strains, they'll be able to redesign those vaccines. Being able to mass produce them, that's another question. But yeah, it's a major concern. And really, we didn't know about all the mutations because in the United States, we weren't doing enough sequencing. They found that mutant strain in the UK because they had the best viral sequencing effort in the world. And clearly, that's something that needs to be ramped up. Everybody needs to be, when we get these new viruses, monitoring for mutations. And we could do it.
Absolutely. And basically, monitoring is one of the primary conditions for monitoring the behavior of animals. It's one also of the primary requirements or conditions for early detection. Like for instance, the general public or we the students, we say early detection is important, while scientists are saying early diagnosis. So therefore, the scientific understanding and the understanding of the general public sometimes is takes time,
Mhm.
basically, and that can lead actually to many conspiracy theories. In the region where I live, actually, many people think that coronavirus is just a conspiracy theory or political propaganda, etc., etc. So therefore, the general audience does not have sufficient information about the basically the origin or the zoonotic origin of COVID-19. And also, people are not trusting the quality of the vaccines that are produced and sent to many other countries, because there are different types of vaccines, for instance. In your opinion, does the future of One Health will guarantee to some extent um, the necessity to develop some social understanding of why it is important to know that viruses have zoonotic origin?
Well, there so many things. Everything you're touching on with the public not believing their health agencies and not having, I think a lot of that goes to early on. World Health and other, the CDC, trying to minimize panic. And then that message changed. And first they were told, don't wear a mask. Oh, now you have to wear a mask. It's like, just tell the public what you know. And if you don't know it, just tell them what you don't know. It really undermines, confidence in public health agencies when they say one thing and then turn around and say something else. So from a social science point of view, that's a lesson they need to learn. No wonder no one believes them, because the
Absolutely.
story has changed so many times. And they need help from, how to deliver that message to the public. And, with the conspiracy theories and everything, the problem we face is with all these Twitter platforms, there's so much information, and a lot of it's incorrect. So no one knows what to believe. And, we need to have a strong scientific voice. A virus is a virus. It's not politics. It's a virus.
Absolutely.
And the
Absolutely.
virus behaves a certain way. And it has nothing to do with whatever your political affiliation is. The virus just looks at us as targets and doesn't care. We're just things to infect. So The takeaway message from this is we are going to have to work, as a One Health community to figure out how to better relate information to the public, how better to influence their behavior so they will trust what's being said and follow through on recommendations, because that's the only way we're going to protect public health. But a little more, some better messaging. And people also, I think, do not understand science, that it doesn't happen overnight. That's the problem. And especially when the virus keeps changing, it takes time to do some of these studies. We can't just snap our fingers and get the answer. And the public may not understand that. So I can understand their frustration, but it all comes down to messaging, communication, and transparency. Let's just tell them exactly what's going on.
Indeed, and also in the region where I live, basically some countries were trying to promote a new model or concept of healthy tourism during the era of COVID-19. So for instance, there were many tourists from Russia, the UK, who were visiting Turkey and other countries in the Middle East during the pandemic, but basically a wonderful cat. Hello, cat. And basically they were trying to promote some healthy model or concept of tourism that will at the same time protect the tourists who are visiting the countries here in the Middle East, and basically for the sake of the well-being of the economy. But I think that this should be to some extent a wake-up call for the legislator and the policymakers or the decision body institutions who actually always try to draft a bill that is too much legally or politically conceived, but the medical aspect or perspective may be basically not taken into consideration. In my opinion, this wake-up call alarm for the policymaker should include a collaboration, or ask for collaboration with pathologists and veterinarian specialists in order how properly to draft a bill from a medical perspective, not from a legal reasoning aspect, in my opinion.
Right, I agree 100%. You need science-based policy, science-informed policy. The bottom line is, if we had enough N95 masks, which are the only masks known to protect from tiny little viruses, a kerchief doesn't do it, a bandana doesn't protect you. That's why N95 masks exist. If we didn't need them to protect from viruses, why would pathologists wear them when they're working on dangerous viruses? But there aren't enough. And in the US right now, President Biden is going to mandate, he's through a war act, that corporations have to produce enough masks for the American public. Well, if we had enough N95 masks a year ago, so everyone could have worn them, we wouldn't have had all that respiratory spread. So, it's as simple as that. If you're trying to stop a virus, you have to stop the way it spreads. And if the number one way this virus is spread is through aerosol and droplet transmission, if we all had masks, it would have significantly have decreased the amount of contagion. And something as simple as that, you just have to get down to, it wouldn't have had such a negative impact on the economy if everyone knew that they were protected from either getting infected or spreading the virus. But we didn't have the personal protective equipment that was required.
Absolutely. And there actually, I think, as a last point before we wrap up this session, is basically that the legal provisions nowadays are no longer accessible. There is this question of legal provision or the accessibility accessibility of legal provisions to be as a process to be very difficult to proceed or to perceive, because for instance, as students, we're reading, for instance, if I'm reading a medical bill or a bill that was just recently published about COVID-19, therefore we can just see that the narrated stories are just a copy paste from a previous bill that was promulgated 1 month ago, let's say, or 2 months ago. Therefore, there arises the problem or the question of the accessibility of the legal provisions. Everything looks like it's written by specialists who are postdoctorates, and therefore they use very technical language. And therefore, when an old grandfather will read a legal provision and he does not know or he's not familiar with the medical concepts or legal concept, basically he won't understand the content. So there is the problem of the accessibility regarding information, sharing the correct information. Maybe this can be also a message for the legal specialists, that they should to some extent address the problems with the language that the people understand, because not everyone is an academic and a professor at university. Therefore, we should educate through the language that the people understand as well.
Well, you raise a good point, because whenever they write bills in the United States, they are put out for public comment, but the general public is not going to be reading that material, as you said. And so that could be a role for people like yourself who are involved in the social sciences. I don't know that the people writing the bills will take responsibility for that, but maybe someone as an intermediary will be able to translate what the bill means and the impact it would have on the public. I think that's a great idea. I will tell you that legislation in the United States is being put forward on One Health. There are a number of bills, and the most recent one actually proactively reached out to experts in One Health, and they actually listened to what we had to say. And the most exciting thing is they got to the crux of the issue. If all of the money always goes to the public health agency, how can we expect anything to ever change? This bill gives one vote per agency on where the money goes. And maybe for the first time ever, we will see money going to the wildlife sector so they can create biosurveillance that doesn't, that's very, very weak. Maybe we'll be able to fill in some of those gaps, all those species that fall outside of the jurisdiction of any federal agency are not under surveillance. So I'm very excited. Who knows if the bill will pass? But I'm excited that they actually asked for input and incorporated it. So I would tell all the young people out there who are interested in One Health, I'm not political, but I am now actively engaged in the political process in terms of trying to have an impact on legislation. Because if you want change, it has to come at that level. That the funding stream has to change. Do what you can do on a local level, absolutely. But you should know who are the legislators in your country. You should know. You should have them on speed dial. You should be calling them and saying, "Why aren't you doing something about this?" People have to speak up and make sure that legislators wake up and do what needs to be done. And they represent you. So make your voice heard.
Absolutely, you're right. And definitely the concept of One Health, I believe that truly will help out to basically define the scope of so-called the importance of knowing that viruses have a zoonotic origin. Therefore, that is something that is incontestable.
And well, not all viruses.
Absolutely, but in terms of
all the recent ones, yeah.
Indeed. Therefore, that is something that I would like also to point out at the as a last point is that zoonotic origin of COVID-19. Politicians just mention the concept or the notion of COVID-19, but if they mention the zoonotic origin of COVID-19, that will make more sense, and that will perhaps let think legislators to ask themselves, oh, what does the notion of zoonotic means, or the adjective of zoonotic means? There is where we can make some changes, or we can ask questions, in my opinion.
I agree. The bottom line is One Health is common sense.
Yes.
Animal health is human health. And until we stop looking only at humans, we will continually be caught by surprise. It's an outmoded means of approaching disease that no longer works, that does not meet the challenges we all currently face. So everybody needs to wake up and smell the coffee and sort of think outside the box and shift their perspective to be one that's more inclusive.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. Therefore, I would like to thank you a lot for conducting this interview with me and giving me some insights regarding the importance of pathology. As I'm from the social science background, I'm every day learning about some new concepts and notions. So thank you for basically teaching me some new aspects of One Health and pathology. It was a pleasure talking with you. I look forward in the future to collaborate with you in some of your projects, and I wish you the best of luck in your academic career.
Thank you so much, Hristina. It was lovely speaking with you, and I congratulate you for your effort that you're trying to get this message out. So good job.
Thank you once again. All the best to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.